Hi, everyone, and welcome back to A New Majority. I'm your host, Isabel, and today we are going to be talking about immigration. So, immigration has been a heavily politicized issue. It has been for a very long time. And right now, we're seeing people getting deported on a grand scale. It's at a point where, not just undocumented people with no criminal record are being deported, but legal students that are here on a visa, legal residents, people with green cards. And so right now we're kind of in this dangerous era where a lot of people are being deported with no due process. Some are being taken to Panama. You know, there was a plane that sent migrants back to Colombia. There are people who are being sent back or sent to rather El Salvador to be a prisoner there. And so right now we're just seeing a lot of things that we've never seen before. And I really think it's important to shed light on this issue. I want to first talk about Henry Albanzo, who is a 29-year-old migrant who came here from Venezuela seeking asylum. He has no criminal record, was detained in January, and is accused of being part of a Venezuelan gang despite having no criminal history here. Unfortunately, his story is not unique. There are many people who are being taken simply for being accused of being part of a Venezuelan gang with no due process. I think that's very important to highlight. There is no due process. And, officials are defending this, saying that no due process for criminals, but these aren't criminals. Okay. And so I just think it's important to talk about um, the way that his wife found out that he was in El Salvador was through the news. She saw her husband in a video with his head shaved off in a Salvadorian mega prison. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of people are finding that their relatives have been deported to El Salvador. And another person I want to bring light to is Ramesa Olshurk. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. She's a PhD student at Tufts University in Massachusetts who was detained today. She has no criminal record, and she wasn't just approached by one ICE agent. She was approached by six who all had masks, all had sunglasses, and all did not look like ICE agents. And so I just, want to put this out there that we all need to be allies here. I know it's hard. I know I mean I if these people aren't even being able to be identified, right? And I'm assuming this is a cowardice act if they're hiding their face, hiding their eyes. And so I think it's important to talk about the scale and how much they're ostracizing these people, right? Because she looked like a normal weight woman, normal height. But 6 agents? I mean, why were there 6 agents there to detain her, right? And she was here on a student visa. She's here to get an education, okay? And, these, um, detainees are not just happening now, they have happened, again, since January. And in January, there was a famous raid in Newark, New Jersey, where they had taken a US citizen, a veteran, and later he was released from ICE custody. And I think that just goes to show that, like, we're not even safe. We're being targeted, we're being profiled, right? Because if they think that you don't look American, I guess, you're going to be targeted. And so I just want to put it out there that we all need to be aware of what's going on. We need to demand our representatives to do something about this. Okay? The United States is a country that represents freedom, justice, refuge. People come here to seek asylum, not just people in South America or Central America, from all over the world, right? And when people come here, they're coming to get some type of security. And so I think what's happening right now is very unfortunate. It's very disgusting. It's inhumane. It's unconstitutional. It's illegal. And I really wanted to shed light on this because Again, like this shouldn't be happening. We shouldn't be profiling people, and we shouldn't be deporting people for practicing free speech. Free speech needs to be protected. We'll definitely have an episode covering free speech with a special guest. But for right now, I just wanted to bring this to your guys' attention. And I hope that you guys do more research on this. I will post more research this week on the Instagram and TikTok. And I'll also link below links to know your rights and to know what to do in a case that ICE shows up at your door. And so I am going to end the news section of this podcast with that. I know that was a lot to digest and a lot to think about. And I want to talk about my guest. So, my next guest is Madyson. Madyson is a journalist for Stateline News, and we are going to talk about what it's like to be a journalist now. Madyson graduated about a year ago, and one of her main focuses is AI. In our interview, we got to talk a little bit about what the future of journalism looks like, the prevalence of independent journalism, the difference between a for profit and nonprofit, polarization, and other things that I think you guys are really going to enjoy. And so I am excited to have Madyson here with me. And I hope you guys all stay tuned for that interview. Thank you guys. Hello, and welcome back to A New Majority. I am here with Madyson.
Hello.
Madyson here is a journalist, and she's joining us here today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us.
Of course. I'm very excited.
Madyson is an alumni, and so, she's a recent grad, and she's been in the field, I guess, in an interesting time, right?
Very, very interesting. I will say that. Yeah.
For our viewers, can you just tell them what kind of journalism you do?
Yeah. So I mainly specialize in online news. I'm a tech policy reporter for Stateline, which is part of the State's Newsroom Network. It's a nonprofit news organization, which is great because, news organizations are really going through a lot right now.
Mhm.
And so nonprofit news kind of allows people to give to, the really important mission of independent journalism. And so I cover technology policy, which is great because it's a lot of artificial intelligence, broadband, and I'm hoping to get into some cyber security stuff soon. And then on top of that, I also do newsletters, social media, and things like that. So a lot of multimedia into the job as well. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. So I think right now we're kind of in an interesting time where people, question the media or don't really know where to look for news or what, you know, news channels really do. And so, how do you define us restoring our faith in journalism, and why does it matter today?
I think that's a really important question because I think it's something that my newsroom, like me and my editors and me and my coworkers, like this is something that we think about and we talk about really all the time. And I think one of the most important things that immediately comes to mind is that I think that when we are covering communities, and so this is very niche for me, but I talk a lot about, artificial intelligence. Not everyone works with AI every day. There are some people that use ChatGPT. There are some people that use I think the Dolly, like the system that makes you let you create images and things like that. But on average, I don't think that there's that many Americans that are using serious AI systems every day. And so maybe the things that I'm writing about don't relate to them. But I think that we really need to find a way to get our stories to connect with our readers. And that comes with, talking to the people that are in that community that are being directly impacted, not just focusing on what experts have to say because experts know what they're talking about, but they sometimes haven't lived that experience. It means having a diverse newsroom as well and
Mhm.
people that are able to talk about those things and understand where people from these communities are coming from, especially when we talk about covering black communities, Latina communities, whoever we're talking about. It's always really important that we have people that look like us in the
Yeah.
newsroom.
Yeah.
And so I think that those are all some steps that we can take to restoring trust. Obviously, we're working within the constraints of politics and an administration that's not very friendly towards journalists and news organizations. And so I'm waiting to see how that will play out, and it
Yeah.
does make me nervous as a young person in journalism. I've only been in my role for about a year and a half after graduating in
Mhm.
May of 2023. But I hope that those are just some steps that hopefully can get people started.
Yeah, and I think it's super important to have people that look like us in media and tell our stories because no matter how much a journalist that may not come from our background is reporting on things that maintain to our culture, it's kind of hard sometimes to um, understand.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I'm glad you're doing this, and this is very important. And yeah, when stories are being told, we do need people who are affected to, talk about their perspectives. So, can you just tell us what is journalism and what inspired you to pursue a career in journalism?
Well, I'll start with that first question. I was last year I was able to attend the National Association of Black Journalists conference in Chicago, which was actually great because I'd never been to Chicago before, and I was very excited. I got to see the bean, I got to try the hot dog, all that good stuff. And I got asked this exact same question in one of the sessions, and we kind of talked about it, and we sat down and we were like, "What is journalism? Like, what is it that we're really doing?" And one of the things that I really appreciated was that everyone that answered said in some shape or form that we're storytellers, and
Mhm.
we're not just taking what we see and doing what we want with it and throwing it out there. We're really telling the story of America and telling the story of even countries outside of America. And so when you look at it that way, I think some of the things that I mentioned earlier, it just becomes a lot more prevalent and a lot more significant to our mission. And in terms of how I got into journalism, when I was younger, I was literally interested in everything. And so, obviously when I was like 4, I wanted to be a ballerina. But then after that, I wanted to be a teacher, and then I wanted to be a lawyer, and then I wanted to cook, and then I wanted to have my own cooking show. I love cooking.
Mhm.
And so I was like, how am I going to find something if it seems like every day I want to do something else? And I had literally gotten to like my junior year of high school and I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And so at this point, we're applying to colleges, and it's like, well, you got to know what you're going to major in if you want to, pick a college that fits for you. And I joined my high school's yearbook kind of just on a whim. The teacher was my English teacher from ninth grade, and she was like, "Oh, you should do yearbook," and I was like, "Okay." And it ended up literally being my favorite thing ever. And I actually was a lot more focused on the photography side when I was in high school. And so by my senior year, I had become the photography editor. But the writing was amazing as well. And so when I got to college, I knew that that was something that I wanted to do. And I was okay, journalism could be great. And I was scared. A lot of the things that we're seeing in the industry now were true back then as well. Lots of industry layoffs. Sometimes presidential administrations haven't been very friendly towards the news, and also they don't get paid that well. And so it was something that kind of scared my parents. But I saw it as an opportunity to really write the script for America's future. And so yeah.
Awesome. I love that. Sometimes unexpected paths come along from doing like a hobby or something fun.
Mhm.
So I know you said you've only been in the field for about a year and a half. And so have you already seen changes in the field? And how do you expect the field to change going forward?
Well, I will say that I will say that over the last year and a half, one of the things that I've really noticed is that the way in which the public interacts with the media, digests the media, all of that stuff really is dependent on who is in office. And I didn't understand how important that was until I really got into my role. And we, as you know, cover a lot of politics, a lot of policy,
Mhm.
and so I had always, had my ear to politics, national, federal politics,
Mhm.
but a lot of it is also statewide. And
Yeah.
so we live in Virginia. Well, I live in Virginia, and we're in Virginia. And one of the things that I just didn't realize was that in our state, it's actually not too hard to go into the Capitol and cover the news. It's pretty easy, and you won't really get a lot of pushback. There are some senators, some representatives that maybe are touchy with the media because they might have like been part of a scandal or they've been covered before and they didn't like it. But for the most part, you can walk into the Capitol and you can do news. There's literally this one person, and he goes in and he just has a Twitter account, and now he has a Blue Sky account, and he just talks about what he sees. And
Mhm.
so it's pretty open here. In other states, that's not the case. And there's some states that have taken away protections. And like even in Kansas last year, there was an incident where they raided a newsroom and they ended up getting in trouble for that because there was kind of no point. They were just there to intimidate them. And so I do think that the political landscape that we're in has such a big impact on journalism. And that's why I think it's important now that we kind of look at this national landscape, but also take a focus as how each state house is dealing with the reporters in their state. And so I would hope that over the next couple of years it gets a little bit easier, you know.
Yeah.
And I mean, I love this job, but I also have seen so many colleagues and so many legends that I look up to leave. And whether it's mental health, really bad pay, it's a really heavy job.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping over the next couple of years, maybe we'll have, you know, people that are interested in being like, hey, there's an issue with like news right now. We should probably fix that. That's
Yeah.
my hope.
Yeah, and I think it's so cool about that person you mentioned going into the Capitol and wandering around with the Twitter account. I definitely do think that there should be more visibility and transparency. And, at the end of the day, our representatives are working for us. So I definitely do think we should have that accessibility to go into the Capitol or any government building. And so I wonder, like, how important is transparency and how accessible is it for journalists to talk to politicians?
Hmm. Well, as I mentioned before, a lot of it does depend on where you are and
Yeah.
what you're covering. If there's like a Juneteenth event going on in the city, I think politicians are obviously much more likely to talk about that because it's going to make
Mhm.
them look good. But if it's a more touchy subject, as in like maybe the city of Richmond did not do something correctly, it's
Yeah.
going to be a little bit harder to pull out that information to really find people to talk to. And so I'll give one example. Just a couple of months ago, there was a really bad storm, I believe, and there was a power outage, and it knocked out the entire water system in the city of Richmond.
Oh my God.
And I live in Henrico, and so I've lived in Henrico since August, and I thankfully was not in the heart of the city where some people really didn't have water for days. I had a boil advisory, and I just dealt with it, moved on, did what we usually do. But the information from what I noticed, coming out from that incident, it literally took weeks to really get a clear picture of what exactly happened. And it turns out the city had been missing some checkpoints for years.
Wow.
And so when you have stuff like this happening, it's not just a lack of transparency because it shouldn't take weeks, and I would say months because I still see stories about it in the news today. It shouldn't take that long to get that information.
Yeah.
And then I would say going off of that, another thing that I think the city really missed in all of that is accountability,
Hmm.
because who answers for that? We have a new mayor, and he literally became mayor, I would say, like the week that happens. And so is our former mayor going to take care of that, or is he going to have any accountability for that? And so I think when it comes to talking to politicians, it really really depends on your story, and it depends on where you are. And also, I would say one thing that I use to make it a little bit easier, because I know that we talk about this in my newsroom all the time. Sometimes politicians just don't want to talk to us.
Yeah.
It is really hard. One thing that I try to do is humanize myself, because I think that they see us as somebody to get them in trouble.
Hmm.
Like they see us as a form of like policing
Hmm.
or whatever. And so I think one of the things that I always do is like, hey, like, if I'm talking about a story about artificial intelligence, sometimes I'll just throw in like, hey, I'm actually worried about how AI could act in the future. And
Yeah.
I know that as journalists we're supposed to be unbiased and we're supposed to be completely objective, but at the same time I'm human. And
Yeah.
so I think it's okay for me to say like, yeah, I'm a little worried about AI.
Yeah. And
Because
that's
we
totally
all
normal.
we all I was about to say I would say that we all are thinking about artificial intelligence in some form or fashion. And so sometimes I'll just like let them in and I'll be like, hey, like I'm not just a reporter, I'm also Madyson. And like Madyson sometimes thinks about AI outside of work as well.
Yeah.
And I think in that case, it's a lot easier to connect with people
Hmm.
before trying to interview them. So,
Yeah, I think it's really important that you say that to humanize yourselves, because I definitely do think right now in our current media landscape, people see journalists as enemies or villains, and I think that definitely needs to change. Not everyone, of course, but
I was
but
very nice.
no, but certain people do. I would
Yeah.
say just like in the polarized media landscape, not in general, but
Mhm.
actually I would say in general, like online is what you mostly see. But okay, I think it was really interesting what you were saying, kind of like, during Juneteenth, maybe they'll choose to appear versus like when you're trying to hold them accountable, maybe they won't. And I think that's really problematic. And I do think that like politicians especially, you know, journalism is our way of the public being able to understand what's going on. And journalists have a huge responsibility to kind of break down the news so that we can digest it and fully understand. And again, like we're kind of like at the whim of what journalists are able to get and what they're able to tell us. And so I wonder, do you think that right now, I guess we can talk about just the state of Virginia, would you say that most politicians are kind of only focused on the optics versus the substance when talking to journalists?
Well, I will say, hmm, I since most of my coverage is national, I
Hmm.
do know about some of the stuff that goes on in Virginia, but not all of it. I'm not the expert in Virginia state politics, but I will say that it is always a balancing game.
Okay.
There's always a balancing game, and everyone wants to look good. Nobody wants to look bad. And I even had a interview with a um a a politician from Washington State. And at the very end, he kind of just made a joke. He was like, "Yeah, just make sure I look good." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I kind of laughed it off and kept going. But like a lot of it really is optics. So I do think I will say there are people out there, there are representatives and senators and assembly people that really, really do want to make a difference.
Yeah.
There definitely are. And I know that a lot of these people also have personal stories
Hmm.
for how they came to get into a position of power and why they want to make a difference and all of that. And so I definitely think that there are people that want to change the world for the better. But at the same time, it will always be an optics game because at the end of the day, they also want to make sure that their seat is safe. So,
Yeah. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. So, what's one thing you would say that people consistently get wrong about journalists in journalism?
um, I so when I was at the university, I took a class and it was journalism and movies,
Hmm.
and it was a really cool class because it was a seminar. So we only met once a week, and literally we just watched movies that had to do with journalism, and the way that the media portrays. Or I guess the entertainment media portrays journalists has always been so silly to me because it's a lot of late nights in our very like dark and eerie apartments and coffee and staying up until the middle of the night and poor pay and there's people after us and sometimes I will say if it's a serious enough story there might actually be people after you um but I would say that it's not depending on the type of work you do it's okay to be a journalist and also enjoy your life and so I think that a lot of times the portrayal is very like depressing and dark and I would say that like I don't want people to see journalism that way because if they see journalism that way, then it's like, why would I want to be a journalist? It looks absolutely horrible. And I think that's kind of what my parents were even seeing when I said I wanted to be a journalist.
Yeah.
They were like, oh my gosh, like, haven't you seen this documentary where yada, 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 and whatever happens? And it looks terrifying. Um, but I personally, I really enjoy my job. I think that I'm making a difference in the world. I like bringing people the stories that they really need to hear.
Hmm.
And I'm also enjoying my personal life as well.
That's
I
very
don't have a
important.
dark and scary apartment, I don't think. And I exercise and I take time to hang out with my friends. And so I think that it is a hard industry. I will say that. It is very hard. And I'm grateful to work at an organization that gives us a lot of time off and a lot of resources and things like that for if I am going through, the hard times of journalism. Um, Mental health plays a huge role in that. We are constantly be if you feel like you're seeing a lot of news, just imagine how we feel.
Yeah.
We are reading the news all the time. And so I think that when I think about it that way, or when you think about it that way, it's mental health is really, really important when it comes to being a journalist, being a reporter. And so I would say that you can find the balance. You can be a reporter and you can change the world without killing yourself in the process because you really just got to make sure that even though the world could be telling you so many different things, you can turn it off and you can take your laptop and you can throw it in the trash and enjoy your weekend, which is what I'm going to do once once we're done.
Yeah, and that's really important. Definitely work-life balance. And, I'm just thinking about those very young bankers in New York who end up
Mm,
taking their life from working too much. And I think right now it's really important to, you know, take into account your life. And I think we're seeing much of a pushback from that, from like our
Mhm.
generation right now. And so I'm really hopeful for the future and for the workforce. And I think people now are starting to realize how much time off and time to yourself really does matter.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And so I want to talk a little bit about polarization.
Yeah.
So I think many Americans on either spectrum, right, might either label CNN as liberal news and Fox News as divine truth. And I think the same can be like vice versa, which has led us to deep polarization. And I just, I worry. So, how do you see big media outlets contributing to this problem?
Whew. That's a really good question. I work on a smaller team. And
Hmm.
so some of the things that we cover, are a little bit more niche and they aren't making as much as an impact as like maybe CNN or the New York Times or the Washington Post and Fox and all of that. Um, I think that a lot of times those bigger media organizations really just want page views
Yeah.
and they want clicks and they want revenue and they want things that keep the lights on in their newsroom. Um, and personally, it's scary because I get it. I understand journalism is in a crisis, but I don't think that's the solution.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of times, as I've mentioned before, with the administration that we're in right now, they're already pretty negative towards journalists and pretty
Yeah.
negative towards certain types of news and fake news and all of that stuff.
Hmm.
And they'll play off of that. And I think another thing, and we just had this conversation in my newsroom today, and I'm really glad that we did, is that I think that traditionally journalism is supposed to show both sides of the story.
Yeah.
And I believe that. I do think that we need to get every perspective. But what do you do when one of those perspectives is spreading blatant lies? And so we literally like have stories where, one side will say, "Oh, I believe this and this and this." And then the other side will say, "Well, like," and just insert the most racist comment that doesn't actually like make any sense or isn't factually correct. And so I think that sometimes media organizations will just go with it because they're like, "Oh, well, that's the other side of the story, so we're going to publish it." When in reality, I think that we're doing a disservice to our readers and to our watchers if we're just going to publish anything.
Yeah.
And I mean, on my team, we have a fact checker. Literally all of our stories, we have to fact check every single line. And when I first joined, I was so ticked because it is such a tedious process. But thank God for fact checkers, honestly.
Yeah.
I really think like just publishing the other side because it's getting all of the perspectives is what's going to do in journalism, because there's going to be somebody in rural Wisconsin that reads that and is like, "Oh wow, I never considered that perspective," and they're going to believe it and they're going to run with it and they're going to see somebody on Fox News yelling it and they're going to be like, "Oh yeah, it's on the TV too. It's probably correct." And
Yeah.
that's not to say that we shouldn't highlight when maybe a prominent figure or a politician says something bad. We should definitely be holding politicians accountable and
Hmm.
people in power accountable for saying crazy stuff. We definitely should.
100%.
But I just don't think that the both sidesism, if you will, is going to work in like the era that we are right now.
Yeah. Um, that's a lot there. Thank you. Thank you for
It's
that
just it's
answer.
and I hate to like beat a dead horse, but it is
No,
just
you're
it is
not.
such it scares me. And it's something, and I don't want to say luckily, but I work in like technology policy, so it's not as intense maybe, but like my coworkers have talked about this, whether it comes to like voting and healthcare and education. And we should include the 10 commandments in the classroom in Louisiana because this way is the only way.
Yeah.
Versus, well, there is the separation of church and state, and versus, and it's the back and forth and the back and forth. And if we just keep doing that, we're gonna find ourselves in an echo chamber that is filled with misinformation. And so it's
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah. And I fear that we're kind of already in that echo chamber. I mean, I think a lot of we're kind of fighting an epistemological crisis right now. And it's hard. I think it's worse to be in an echo chamber
Mhm.
than in an epistemological bubble because, once you kind of like get the same thing repeated over and over again, it's kind of like you can't really leave,
Mhm.
and it's a lot of unlearning that you have to do too. And the media or big, I would say big media mostly, because I think they have the most influence
Oh yeah, for
and
sure.
in the highest reach too,
For sure.
kind of is playing into this problem. And so, media is a business and the free market is made to meet consumer preferences. That's just the name of the game. And so, to what extent do you feel that networks feel forced to compromise their reporting in order to favor content that draws their audience?
Mm. I one of the things that really kind of threw me, I will say, was I get on LinkedIn and I look around, I see what people are up to, see what the job industry looks like. I hang out on LinkedIn every once in a while, and I saw a job posting for an AI assisted reporter. And I was like, what is an AI assisted reporter? And I was like, what in the world is that? And it was from, after reading it a little bit more, it was going to be a reporter that was, using AI to kind of build those stories and get those stories done. And I was like, okay, understandable. A little scary, but okay. But this is the same company who had been laying off journalists left and right. Like I can't even count. Like they've been laying off journalists regularly for years and
Yeah.
shutting down newsrooms and shuttering departments and things like that. And so I think that newsrooms are really trying to shift to efficiency rather than having a team of people that really know what they're doing. And we're going to see a lot more things like that where maybe a website has a lot more AI bots behind it than we originally thought. And that scares me because that really does mean that a lot of these legacy media outlets and these big media corporations are much more interested in getting clicks, making a profit, rather than supporting journalists by literally just hiring them. And we also went to college, so we know what we're doing. And they also don't, they're trying to cheap out. They
Yeah.
don't want to pay us and they
Yeah.
don't want to give us money. And so I think that it's really it's upsetting. I'll say that.
Yeah. It's really interesting seeing how certain industries are kind of shifting towards efficiency.
Hmm.
And we're all kind of in this uncertainty with AI, because it seems like AI is everywhere, and it is everywhere.
Yeah, for sure.
And I remember seeing a news article about one of the big news corporations. I forget if it was like the New York Times or the New York Post or the Washington Post had sent out a notification saying that Luigi Mangione had died, and then they had to retract it, and it was because an
Oh,
AI had posted the story.
I didn't hear about that. That's
Yeah, it was
crazy. Oh my
very.
goodness.
Yeah, I
That
remember.
happened with Sports Illustrated as well.
Wow.
Like they were fine. Like somebody had looked and was like, "This person doesn't exist," like by the byline or whatever, and they were like, "Oh yeah, well it was AI," and they had to come out and say it. It's just scary.
Yeah, and that also wasn't the first time I think that news organization had allowed AI to post like a false story. So yeah,
Hmm.
it's definitely like very interesting and honestly dangerous, because we're assuming that people are going to go and fact check, or I mean, of course, if the news is reporting it, you're kind of trusting the news.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just another thing that really kind of erodes trust.
Yeah,
When you have things like this happening. And a lot of newsrooms, some of them don't hold themselves accountable for that kind of thing. If something goes wrong, they'll just take the story down rather than running a correction, making an apology, or things like that. And so sometimes a lot of things that, I don't know, I would say a lot of stories or incidents in cases like that don't get national coverage because you don't find out about it. They
yeah,
scrub it and they keep it moving. And so, um, like I said, scary times.
very scary times.
Scary times.
And talking about scary times, I think one thing I'd really like to talk about is, I guess, like independent journalism, but more so like right wing independent journalism. And
Mm.
one person in particular that stands out to me is Alex Jones, who was found guilty for saying that the Sandy Hook shooting wasn't real and that they were crisis actors. And I don't think people really understand the reach that
Hmm.
he had and how many followers he had, the influence he's had. I think he's still reporting. Like I think
Yeah, I
yeah.
think he is.
Yeah. And I think when we see journalists kind of report, I don't even know if I should call him a journalist, maybe a commentator who report things like this, how does this undermine journalism?
Mm. I think that's another really good question. I don't want to say, but in his case, I will say he's definitely undermining journalism. It's
Yeah.
just there's a difference between commentary and just spewing absolute mess. Like
Yeah.
there's a very big difference there. Like I there are some commentators that I see on the news and I'm like, wow, that was thoughtful, that was useful, that got me to look at this story in a different light. I feel like the work that he does not make me do any of that. It just makes me question everything. And it's like, man, like where did he get that from?
Yeah.
Or why would he say that?
Yeah.
And it's just, and so in that case, yeah, but I do also, I will say that I do think, um, I think when we were in school, we kind of described them as like community journalists or
Mm,
also influencers.
yeah.
And I think that I'm a little scared to say that they undermine the mission of journalism because some of them actually do really great work.
Okay.
There's this one person on social media and he literally just posts the good news of the day because,
We need that.
we need it bad. And after watching some of his videos, and he always links like in the chat what he's talking about, so you can go and read the story. It's credible, it's real, and it's accurate as well. And so I don't want to say that you can't be a journalist or you can't contribute to like the news environment if you don't have a degree and you don't work at a what you call it.
Yeah.
If you're gonna have a podcast, if you're gonna have like a YouTube channel, if you're gonna have a anything, you can do the news. Like I mentioned with that guy earlier too, who kind of just goes in with his Twitter.
Yeah.
But I will say it's also dangerous and it goes unchecked when you have right wing commentators saying anything.
Yeah. Questioning objective truth.
And I think that at this point, it's turned into almost like a cult like following. And so you have people that believe these things because everyone they're listening to is saying these things. And it's kind
Yeah.
of the chamber that we talked about earlier. And it's just a downhill spiral and they never come out of it. And these people also encourage their listeners not to listen to other people.
Yeah.
They're like, and they're going to say this and this and this, but don't believe them. And that's not what a commentator is supposed to do. A
Yeah.
commentator is really supposed to be like, this is my perspective. This is what I think. And generally in the news, what I believe part of our mission is to give people a story and let them come to their own conclusions.
Yeah.
Because if we're telling people what to think and telling people not to even think about another perspective, we're doing a disservice.
Yeah.
And so I would say that it's really dangerous when you have people like that because now people are looking at news organizations, they're like, well, Alex Jones said this, so I don't know what you're talking about, and then it just goes downhill from there.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to just lay it out there that you don't need a degree to be involved in the news, to have a show, to have a podcast. I think it's really important to elevate everyday people's voices. Not everybody has the opportunity to go to college. Everybody wants to go to college, and so, yeah, I definitely do think it's important to make sure that people know that their voices are appreciated and their perspectives are valued. Um, and this term community journalists, right, that's a term you use.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I've never heard of that before. Kind of reminds me of like the community fact checkers.
Yeah.
But I know journalists, for the most part, or I would say in general, right, have a ethical code that they follow. And so I'm assuming for a community journalist, maybe this can be a little vague, especially like if you're not necessarily in the field or surrounded by people who kind of make this like a known standard. And so how do you see this ethical code kind of being a little blurry when it comes to community journalists or even I guess smaller independent news? Because I guess
Yeah.
when you have big smaller independent news.
No, you're good. I think that one of the things that I wish that we did better in this country, and there are other countries that do this well, and there's other countries that do it worse, is media literacy. And I
Yeah.
think that there are a couple of states, I'm a state policy nerd, so I'm going to say this. There are a couple of states that are doing a really good job in making sure that kids, when they go to school, whether it's elementary school, middle school, or high school, they're learning about how to navigate the internet.
Mhm.
Because a lot of us, you and me, we kind of grew up in the age of the internet. Like, this is the golden age of information. We can access the internet how we want. And I think as a result of that, there were no guardrails. And so we were kind of doing whatever we want on the internet. I saw y'all on Kick. And so, like, literally, I was not on Kick. I was
Oh,
scared.
really?
And
No, I was on
um,
Kick.
I literally, my mom, she didn't let me have social media until
That's
like
good
a lot
though.
later. And so, and
Yeah.
I do thank her for that
Yeah.
because, ooh, um, but I think that like because we grew up in that like setting, there weren't any really guardrails into this is something that you should look at. This is a website you can trust. This is a website you can't trust. This is something that you shouldn't see and at your age, and things like that. And so I think that over the last couple of years, a lot of people have kind of realized like this is really dangerous. Like we like have people getting online that don't know what they're doing. Not to mention even with older folks. And like this is how scams happen and how older people are like, oh my gosh, like who's a celebrity? Idris Elba just emailed me and he said he needs $1 million and they're draining their entire savings account and just sending it to this person because it looks real and because they got an email. And so I think that media literacy is something that I would like to see increase within the US. And like I said, there are some states that are working on that, but I think that they need to increase some work on that end because really, I think that when it comes to all of this right wing, left wing, like extremist commentary that we're seeing, media literacy would really fix a lot of that. Because if somebody is telling me something like that, I'm gonna instantly say, hey, I should probably check up on that. Or like, hey,
Mhm.
I should see if that's actually right.
Yeah.
And so that'll kind of, put people in the mindset to always think twice about what they see on the internet. And I do say that I wouldn't say that our entire generation is like, goners because we kind of know that as well.
Yeah.
And that's why when things like that happen with older adults, it's like, hey, come on, Idris Elba isn't emailing you. And so
Yeah.
we're able to say that. But
Yeah.
I do still think that there are dangers out there, I would say.
Yeah.
And so I would hope that media literacy is a very big topic, especially with AI coming in
Yeah.
over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that you mentioned like the scamming and I don't think people realize how advanced it has gotten to where people that are politicians or attorneys that are prosecutors
Hmm.
are falling for it too, where they're emptying their bank accounts because they think their son is being kidnapped.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
I saw
way
that.
yeah,
It's scary.
it's scary because when you have these people who are kind of like in charge of this, they can't even tell the difference.
Hmm.
So I think it's we definitely have to come together to kind of fight this because scammers don't discriminate.
Yeah, they definitely don't.
They don't discriminate. um
That's funny.
yeah. So independent news is very important. I think for me, part of this podcast is kind of like, trying to start up a independent news source. And
Mhm.
so, and you work for an independent news too. And so how do you think is the best way for people to support independent news?
I think that honestly, just read it. We write this news for, these audiences to read. And a lot of times, it's hard to connect to everyone. I will say that there is an accessibility issue when it comes to journalism, especially when you think about online news. My entire organization is online. We don't do print. And if you don't have access to internet, and I only know this because I report on broadband all the time, if you don't have access to the internet, you can't get our news. And so
Mhm.
I will say that there's an accessibility barrier for people who may not have, access to things like that. But at the same time, I think that it is all of our responsibility to stay informed, and to do that would to be to go to the people that are literally employed to keep the people informed. And so I would just say read our news, and
Yeah.
don't just read the headlines, don't just read the subhead, read it. And there is also like issues of literacy in across the country, and we're seeing that especially out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Test scores for reading and things like that are also very low. But at the same time, I would just challenge people to read the story and read the entire story. And then, not to mention, supporting local news fiscally.
Yeah.
I don't want to beg for money, but like I said, my organization is nonprofit, and so a lot of our donations and a lot of our the foundations that give to us are really what keep us going.
Yeah.
And so I would say supporting journalism in that way is also great. And if you can't do that, you can also spread the news. And
Yeah.
this is goes back to media literacy. Make sure you're spreading the right news.
Yeah.
But I think that if we're able to lift up politicians and influencers and creators and like even celebrities, I think that we can do that for journalists as well.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
I think that there have been journalists, like even when you think of like um big stories in the past where you would know who wrote that. You'd be able to like name the byline off the top of your head. Now you can't really do that. They'll be like, "Oh, the Washington Post just dropped this huge investigation," but they couldn't tell you who wrote it because they didn't even look at the byline.
Yeah.
And so I think another thing would be just having an appreciation for the people that are doing the work, and that comes with humanizing us because
Yeah.
at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people don't see journalists as humans.
Yeah, no, and that's very important. And I think just to clarify, when you say the right news, you mean accurate news,
Oh yeah, correct, accurate.
objective truth. And then I think also for people that might not know the difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit news organization, can you just kind of explain what a nonprofit
Yeah.
organization is?
Well, nonprofit is literally that we don't take. I guess we're not really funded. Wait, how do I describe this? We're funded literally by our donors. It's literally just donations. And so some of our donations are from large foundations, and they'll give, millions of dollars. And then we have the everyday people that like read our newsletter and they're like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm going to give my $10 or whatever. And you would think in the back of your head, it's like, oh my gosh, they're really just running off of donations. But there are some organizations and there are some people who really, really care about this mission,
Yeah.
and so they're willing to give us a lot of money, and I'm grateful for that. And specifically for my organization, States Newsroom now has newsrooms in all 50 states, and we
Wow.
have our national bureau, we have our DC bureau, and we have my Stateline team, which is kind of the connection between the national and the state. And so we get a lot of coverage now, and because we're a nonprofit, we're also able to share our stories to local outlets for free. And
Awesome.
that is another very important thing when it
Yeah.
comes to accessibility with the news,
Yeah.
because a lot of places, even the Richmond Times Dispatch, you have to pay to see all their stories.
Yeah.
And not everyone has the money for that. And so I will say, I love it. I think that it's the future of journalism. For
Yeah.
profit is
I
just a
hope
little
so.
bit scarier because you're really kind of running off of the revenue that you make from like people buying subscriptions, people buying into your like some people still get the news delivered to their front door. They have to pay for that. And so I think and that's some of the reason why they struggle, because a lot of people aren't really interested in that anymore. They don't
Yeah.
want to pay for the news and they don't want to pay to get a physical paper to their door. And so I think that's why a lot of for-profit places are seeing a lot of struggle. And a lot of more people are getting their news from the internet.
Yeah, and that's really important to you to make sure that the news is accessible. And just so everybody knows, nonprofit organizations are everywhere across different fields, and a lot of them do focus on advocacy, but I guess it really just depends on the field that you're in.
Mhm.
And so yeah, thank you for doing this work. It's definitely
Yeah.
very important. And you know again, we need people like us doing the reporting.
Mhm.
So in your view, what is one of the most important topics that are not being reported on?
Hmm.
And it could just be like one or two.
I think that I'll do one that has to do specifically with my beat, and then one that has to do with kind of more other stuff. One of the things that I think that technology reporting is missing is obviously reporting on artificial intelligence, but I think that when people say artificial intelligence, you think generative AI, which is like chat GPT and things like that, that are able to create images, create meal plans, create schedules, create all those types of things. But artificial intelligence has been here long before generative AI.
Yeah.
And so I think that there are some systems in place that healthcare systems have been using for decades, and we just never
Hmm.
really noticed because we are
Yeah.
only noticing now. I think that there are a lot of underlying systems that we don't have access to. I don't even fully understand them. Those need a
Yeah.
lot more coverage because to create those AI systems, they're being trained on models that most likely have bias in them.
Yes.
And so those models are running, and they've been running for years and years and years, but we're too busy, focusing on generative artificial intelligence. And oh my gosh, Chat GPT told me I should do this workout plan to lose 20 pounds and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And it there's a lot of other things that come with artificial intelligence. I will say
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and just to kind of talk a little bit about that, I'm taking a class that focuses like on AI, and one thing I didn't know that I was so surprised to learn was predictive scoring in the criminal justice system, and how,
Mm-hmm.
I think people forget that AI was made by humans, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all humans have biases, and we're kind of in this place too where we're trying to eliminate the bias, but it's almost kind of impossible because there's so many proxies
Yeah.
to then still discriminate. And so yeah, I think it's something that's definitely not being reported on. And when we see how, humans already kind of implement like desperate impact, and then seeing these models kind of repeat these impacts but then kind of excusing it because they're supposed to be impartial is,
Mm-hmm. Or
kind of,
more efficient. They're saving money. So
yeah, but it's definitely interesting. And yeah, thank you for bringing that up because I definitely
yeah.
think that it's something that people are not talking about.
And I also, yeah, and then on top of that, I think another topic that people are also going to start missing soon is DEI related topics.
Hmm.
And I think that obviously politicians are a lot more focused on DEI in education and DEI within government agencies. But I think that's eventually going to trickle down into every other industry where people are like, oh, well, the government doesn't care about DEI, so I don't need to hire like a newsroom that reflects the people that we serve. And I don't need to hire this person because they look like this. I can just do what I want. And when you have that, not only will it impact the newsrooms, but it'll impact the news that they cover as well. And so I do worry about that. I don't think that there are enough newsrooms that have a designated like race related coverage reporter or a LGBTQ reporter. Like, I don't think
Yeah.
that there are enough newsrooms that have reporters that only focus on those topics.
Yeah.
And I don't think that this wave of anti DEI legislation and rhetoric will help with that either.
That's a very important point, something that I've definitely not thought about. I know for me, like on TikTok, I'll see like pink news,
Mm.
and I forget exactly. I think it's LGBTQ news that they cover or feminist news. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not exactly sure which one, but yeah, no, that's definitely an important thing to think about, and I'm honestly very worried about that.
I worry about it all the time. And so it really takes like, lifting up some of those organizations that are doing the good work, because there are some that are really doing the good work. The 19th is this new nonprofit news organization that literally reports on women's issues,
Okay.
and they're amazing. And Capital B, they focus on Black issues, and it's great. And so there definitely are organizations that are doing that work, but I do think that every organization should have a team of reporters, one reporter, if your newsroom is really that small, that focuses on some of these civil rights issues and some of these social issues that this anti DEI rhetoric is kind of bringing into the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you again for that. For someone that's interested in your path, you are doing, what you set out to do, what you did in college. And, a lot of people, I think right now might feel a sense of urgency to join the field that you're doing. And so, what is one word of advice for those that are interested in following your path?
I would say just do it. And I like literally, I think one of the things that our generation really struggles with is putting themselves out there.
Hmm.
And a lot of that is because of a lot of different things. I think that, like I said, growing up with the internet, a lot of people, we're seeing so much more than we ever saw before. I
Yeah.
know where like most of the people from my high school went to for college. And I went to high school with almost 2,000 people.
Wow.
And so, because of social media, I can automatically see it. I can see what everyone's doing. I can see that this person has this job. I can see that this person went to this school. And I can see that this person is doing better than me or worse than me or whatever, whatever, whatever. And so, I think in that sense, we put a lot more pressure on ourselves. And sometimes we can kind of get that decision anxiety. It's like, well, I don't want to do the wrong thing. I don't want to mess everything up. I don't want to do this wrong, and then I'm not doing as well as them. And I think that that's constantly running through our minds. Not everyone, but it does run through our mind
Runs
at
through
some
mine.
point. Yeah, I was about to say, at some point you're going to think about that. And especially being a recent grad, I think that like we didn't graduate into the best job market, and so a lot of people are still kind of trying to find their footing after our graduation. And so I would say don't hesitate. Just do it. Even if you don't have a journalism degree, I know so many people that didn't have journalism internships and didn't get all the journal. They didn't even work for their college newspaper, and they still are working in journalism today. And so I would just say, just go out there, just write, put pen to paper, type on your laptop, do whatever you got to do. But you can put the news out there, even if it's starting your own blog or starting your own podcast. And so my advice is just do it.
Yeah, and that's very important. And I think one thing for people to always keep in mind is just that it's not straightforward.
Hmm.
And, you know, everybody has their own path. I think for
Hmm.
me, I definitely didn't would compare myself a lot or have, like my parents compare myself to other people, which can
Hmm.
sometimes be hard.
Yeah.
But, at the end of the day, like when it's your life and your life, you really have to just keep those things in mind. So thank you again for that.
Yeah.
My last question is
Okay.
if you could go any time in history, anywhere, it doesn't have to be the US, like anywhere,
Oh, okay.
just as an observer, you wouldn't be able to change the future. Where would you go and why?
Just as an ooh. So I get a little nervous going back to the past. Just because I just get nervous when I think about like, oh yeah, I want to go to the past. I'm like, ugh. So I would say the future, and I don't want to observe myself because I don't want to have that knowledge and then be like, oh my goodness, I'm gonna be 50 years old doing that. I gotta avoid that at whatever cost, or I gotta make sure I get that at whatever cost. I don't want to see myself. I would just love to see, I guess, just the I would love I would stay in the US honestly, and I want to see what happens in 50 years. I
Wow.
want to know what happens once the Trump administration is over. Will his followers continue to be that the way that they are, or will they go back to, the usual politics, which is like you have two parties, and if one party loses, they don't make a huge deal out of it. We just move
Yeah.
on. So I really want to see, I this is such a policy and politics focused view, and I think it's just because that's the news that I do right
Yeah.
now.
It's super important.
um but I really, until the Trump administration is finished, I have no idea what politics are going to look like over the next couple of years. Every day there's something different happening. And as someone who just graduated and just got into this line of work, it's terrifying. I'm not gonna lie. It's so much news. And I think that, I've even talked to my mom about this. I'll be like, I like this is a lot going on. Like, did this ever happen to you? Did you ever feel overwhelmed with just everything happening? And of course she said she had her moments. Like, there was 9/11. She was literally at work when it happened, and I was at home with my dad, and she was very startled about that. And like other things from her childhood that she can remember happening. But she said she has never been in a situation where everything seems to be changing so fast and all the time, and it's also in your face all the time because
Yeah.
of the internet, social media, phones, whatever. Hate to sound like a boomer, but it's in your face all the
It
time.
is in your face all the time.
And so I think that because it's so much, and because I know that our generation is going through we're not just whining either, because I know that some older people will
Yeah.
be like, oh, when I was your age, whatever. No, I think that we are actually going through unprecedented
We
times.
are.
And
Yeah.
I think that as a result of that, I could not tell you where I think this is going even in the next 5 years.
Yeah, and I just want to say to everybody out there, like, your view is not just unique to you in this aspect.
Hmm.
There are people with PhDs that don't know why things are happening the way they're doing,
Oh, that makes me
you
feel even
know?
worse.
I mean, but I think it's just to validate how we're feeling, right? Because I think some people are like, "Oh my god, you're being so dramatic," or "Oh my god, there is urgency." When people that have studied this, that have gone to school for a long time, that are experts in their field, don't understand the political landscape that we're in, we're kind of in a dangerous spot, and
Yeah.
I think we're very lucky and unique to also have people that are experts in various fields, not just
Mhm.
political science but history,
Mhm.
right? That can tell us, like, yeah, these actions have led to this in the past, and so
Yeah.
we kind of already know a little bit of where we're heading, while also trying to remain optimistic and hoping that, like, we come out stronger in the other end. But I do want to say, just for everybody listening, and for both of us
Mhm.
here, and to kind of like remind myself, is we do have to remain optimistic, and being
Yeah.
pessimistic is not a choice. I really hope that in 50 years from now, and I think I would go into the future too, just to see where we are. And like, there's so many disparities today. And
Mhm.
like, honestly, I think people really think that we're kind of in this magical land where racism or systematic inequalities have just surpassed us, where we're
Yeah.
really not there yet.
And I wonder if we ever will be.
But I do remain optimistic, and
Always
I
got to be optimistic.
always
I
gotta
mean,
be
what else are we going
optimistic.
to do?
Exactly. And thank you again so much for coming on. I
Yeah, of
really do
course.
appreciate it. Stay tuned for next week's episode, and thank you guys so much for tuning in.
Thank you.
Madyson had a really interesting story that she covered in college. So, for context, we both went to the University of Richmond, which in 2020 to 2022 was kind of undergoing a change. And I would say not just us, but colleges around the nation and the city of Richmond both took proactive measures to remove Confederate soldiers' names, Confederate soldier statues, and any figures of racism around the country. And Madyson had a breaking story that I really want her to talk about.
Yeah, well, in 2022, there was obviously a lot going on campus. We had the Protect Our Web movement, which had
Yeah.
started, I think, a year or two before, and it had to kind of do with these building names, and that actually got started, I would say, before that. It was like 2018, 2019, when I think the colleges had made like a resolution, like, hey, we need to like talk about these building names at some point. And so in 2022, me and my editor in chief, Jackie, we broke the news that they were changing the names of 6 buildings on campus that were tied to eugenicists and slaveholders. And so I was actually living in one of those buildings. It was previously named Thomas, but now it's Res Hall 2. And so it's so crazy just being back on campus and like seeing they haven't really chosen new names for those dorms yet.
They're
It'll
not
be
going to.
they're not going to.
No,
Oh,
they're
okay.
just going to leave them as it is.
Interesting. I Okay, that's an interesting decision. But yeah, it was really kind of crazy being in that moment, like being able to cover that, because I remember when it happened, I want to say there wasn't exactly like a formal announcement. It was just happening right there. And so I think maybe they sent out an email, and at that exact same time they were taking the names off. And so our photographer Ethan, he ran outside and was like, where are they going? And he got some really good shots, which was great.
Very powerful. I
Yeah,
remember seeing that picture, and at the time, I didn't exactly know what exactly was going on, but I remember just seeing that, and just it was very, I mean, it was during the day.
yeah,
There were
yeah.
two people taking down the sign. There wasn't
Hmm.
just one person. It
And
kind
it
of
was
seemed like
just,
a
it almost seemed like, and I guess I in our heads, because this had been something that had been coming for some time now, like they were kind of working on that for a while. I think that like we thought there would be more ceremony or like, more preparation, but it was
yeah.
literally email went out and they were out on their go-karts taking them down, and I was like, wow. And so it was really great to be able to break that news, and me and Jackie actually won an award for it. And so it's a really
Wow.
great memory of mine. But
Yeah.
I think it's also shows how vital college journalism is,
Yeah.
because I think I was a little scared. I was like, I don't know if people are going to take my college experience seriously. But by the time I was interviewing for the role that I have now, they're like, oh, no, no, that's great. Like it's great. So student journalists and college journalism is very, very important to me, very near and dear to my heart, because that it's only 4 years, but I am telling you, the news and the work that we put in those couple of years, like we were really able to provide the campus with, I think some really good coverage. And so yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for being a part of the college newspaper. I think for anybody out there that's interested in journalism and is on a college campus, I think a great way is to be involved with your college newspaper or any student run magazines. I think is cool too if the newspaper might not be your thing. But you were a sophomore during that time, correct? Or a
2022,
junior?
that was I was honestly a senior by then.
Senior? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your story. And I
Yeah.
think it shows our viewers that, you can do something significant, not just like when you're out of college or, years into your career. You can do something significant today, tomorrow,
Mhm.
whenever. And
100%.
I think it's important to just keep your eye out. So thank you again so much for sharing that story.
Of
And
course. Yeah.
hope you guys enjoyed that.